been a
new.
while, yeah?
Yeah, it has. It has.
What's new? I think I have less hair, more gray hair. That's new for you.
And then also, like my main focus, and I'm sure you appreciate this too, is students, right? Because we got into this because at one point or another, we got interested in the field, we got interested in the science, and wanted to get into it and learn more, right? So that's sort of my perspective.
Yeah,
How's that
that would be.
Okay. All right, welcome to Feed a Minute Physiology. Today we are talking with someone that I have a history with, someone that has done a lot for myself in terms of my professional and scientific development, Dr. Fabiano Amorim. Fab, you were my PhD advisor. You came in, I think, my second or third year as a PhD. I was wondering.
2016. Yeah.
I was wandering around a little bit until you got there. But so we got to work together for a couple of years, and like I said, big impact for me from a professional, academic, and I would also say, like, in a big way from a scientific standpoint. Our conversations talk about research and science really were impactful, and I carry them with me. But yeah, so let's start with yourself. I'm always interested in, we talked about this, and I'm sure at some point, but like, what got you interested in exercise physiology? And you're from Brazil, so ultimately, what led you to work and study exercise physiology in the US?
Okay. All right. First, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure talking to you. And I still missing our conversations like during your PhD. And always like was a challenging sometimes, or sometimes were like interesting talks, and I really miss those conversations. Um, in terms of my background and why I got here in the US, first, as most of the people in our field, I was attached with sports. Like when I was a kid, like I used to swim, and then around the age of 15, 16, when things were getting like hard, like training, and then also as a teenager, I could take my own decisions or like make my own decisions. I decided to stop swimming, but I kept like doing other sports like volleyball. That's big in Brazil. And then one of my friends like used to swim with me. He invited me to work as a swim coach, not coach, but swim teacher for kids. And then that where everything started. Like when I was there, and I had someone that was an exercise science student, like as a colleague, and start like having questions about, like, for example, on why like people get fatigue, like terms of training intensity. I was moving from being with like kids, like with young kids, and then moving more working with adults and teenagers, and then start like training them. And then I got like very interested in this area. And I remember one time, like one of this friend of mine, he said, and I asked him about fatigue, and he said, "Oh, it's a lactic acid." And every time that I heard like someone, "Oh, it's burning," I said, "It's lactic acid." And then that got me into this field, like getting more to understand more about like not the physiology at that time, but how being like a better coach and understanding what I was doing. That was the click, the spark that I was interested at that time. Like to in Brazil, we have like a different system. Like you apply to the college, you have to take a test, and then if you pass in the test, you start already into the program. And then I had the luck to be in the university in my hometown. That was the second largest. I'd say this is probably the second largest exercise science program in Brazil. And that's where everything started as an undergrad. I was very interested in coaching, like in being like training people. I was also came back swimming, but as a master because I was already like over 20 at the time. And then that was like my initial. But in Brazil is different from the US, the way that we have our field, like the exercise science. Basically, in Brazil, you have physical education, the umbrella, and then at the time, like they were debating this to have physical education and two paths, and one was like we call licensure, that's like being a teacher, and the other one was the exercise science. But in Brazil, it's not clear this path, and still today, like people still like fighting and thinking this is you should not do this, and then I was very, I'll say I lost my motivation in some of the parts of my undergrad. I was like not a very good student. For your students that probably going to be listening to the podcast, I was my second, third year was not very good student. Like I was working, I was making money, I was like, do you understand? Like I was enjoying what I was doing, and then the school was not giving me back things that I thought was fulfilling my needs for my job. And and then everything changed when I had an exercise physiology professor. And I went through this class. He was a young professor. He was coming from his PhD in Germany. And man, when I just heard him talking about like exercise physiology, I said, that's the thing that I'm looking for. That's something that I'm very excited. And everything changed in that moment. Like I decided to say, no, I want to finish this degree well, and I want to learn more. And and also for your students, like something that I talk to my students here at UNM, that in my case, maybe I was very lucky. One day, this professor, like after I took his class, like we become like on like friends, like the relationship between like a professor and a student, like but more on in terms of sitting and talking, like have a coffee and talking. And one day he came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to go to Germany?" I said, out of the blue, like, "You want to go to Germany?" He said, "Yeah." I think I mentioned to him that I want to have some like international experience. And then he said, "But I think you have only 2 weeks to give, like you have to give me the answer in 2 weeks, and then in 3 weeks you'll be flying out of the country." And then I said, "No, I want to go." And he said, "Okay, I'm going to connect with this professor in Germany. His name is Jürgen Weineck. He was very popular in Brazil, like many of the textbooks that we use, not for the physiology, but for the training, sports training. And he wrote like probably like 12 books. He's like one of the most famous. He used to be, because he passed away like 2 years ago. And like especially for physical education, etc. He has the best books in Germany. And then he was inviting a student, and I basically got like a free ride to go to Germany and have the opportunity to work with him for like 4 or 5 months. And the interesting thing at that time, my English was very poor and my German was zero. I could not speak like Guten Tag, Guten Morgen, and it was like nothing. And that was the challenge. Like I said, I like it and I want to take the challenge. And it was a very nice period of my life. Like I miss a lot. I miss the people that I met there. I still have contact with Vinek's son. Like he's going to Brazil. He finished his MD degree and he's going to Brazil. I hope we're gonna meet in Brazil, like for the summer in Brazil. And then when I came back, when I finished, I said, I know what I want to do. I want to be a researcher. I want to understand, because I was exposed to there. He was not like on, he was more a writer. He was the one that was able to consume the information, but he was engaged in research, and he exposed me to some of the research that was conducted in his program. And then that was like something that I didn't have the opportunity to see in my university. Although they had like a nice program, like a master's program, like they had like people already working on research, but that changed my mind. And then when I came back, I have family in the US, and then I stopped in New Hampshire, and I talked to a professor at that time, like his name was Robert Kenefick, and we kind of discussed the possibility when I finished my undergrad. I was like a kind of senior to come back to the US and do my master's here in the US. And then, but when I came back to Brazil, like my dad was like his health was not very good, and then I had to postpone the masters, and then I stayed in Brazil for another 3 years, I think 2 3 years. And I took my master's in Brazil because I said I want to be here. I want to support my family at that time. But always thinking about I want to go abroad. I want to expand. The university that I came from, they didn't have a PhD at that time, and then that was limiting also. And then another thing that students like they should understand, like things are happening around us and open so much opportunity, but the opportunity just happen to the ones that are around us. And another thing that happened to my life that I think I was one of the luckiest guy, in my opinion. This same professor, I was in my master's, and he came to me. He said, "Hey, I knew that he was working for the professional soccer team that was my team. I was a premier team in Brazil called Atlético Mineiro, and he was the exercise physiologist for that team. And he came to me at that time. I was a master's, I said, and said, "I need someone to help me. Do you want to help me? I have to teach. I have other commitments, and this team is going through a preseason in a different city, and I need someone to be there, and I trust you." I said, "Yeah, you can count on me." And then basically I spent like 15 days with the team in the preseason. And the funny part, on one of the first tests that we were engaged, like you should do like it's called like a Concon test. Basically, you have to run like in certain intensities and measure lactate to identify where is the lactate threshold, like the running lactate threshold. We used to do this in the field with like players, and he kind of I didn't have experience using the lactate analyzer, and then I was in front of like players that were like national team, like Brazilian national team, etc. And my first day was like a disaster. Like I was trying to get the equipment to work, it was not working. And then I was lucky that I had people that was very supportive. Like I remember this the strength and conditioning, and he was like kind of assistant coach. Said, be slow, like, and don't worry about it. Like, I know that you are new in this, and don't worry. And then it means like next day was fine, and then I was there for 3 years, and they ended up hiring me. I was exercise physiologist. Like they put me to several of the things. And why I'm telling this, because I was around people. Like I was around about my professors. I just came today from UNM, and we just started like a project with the women's soccer team, and I have a student there that she's working there. It means, you understand, like opportunities are all there. You just have to be and to be available. And and then that was I was like living my life, like living my dream in Brazil. That was 2003, and I remember my team, like the team that I I was working, and we went to the semifinals of the Brazilian national championship, and my team lost like on we lost on the semifinal. Like we didn't go to the final, and then we they used to give like award at the end of the season, and then my award at the end of the season, just the money was like I bought a car out of that. Just you have idea on what are the scenario at that time. But there was something that and I was like, my wife had a good job, I had a good job, everything was a dream for me. Like imagine like you working with the team that, and since I was like a kid, was the team that I loved. I was passionate. Like I was in the stadium with like 80,000 people surrounding me. Like, you understand? Like was a wonderful experience. But something that came to my mind, like I was finishing my master's at the time, and the idea to live abroad was in my mind. Like I want to live abroad. I want to do something, and also about the physiology. What brought me to the field was not because I play soccer, was not because I was a soccer coach, was because I was someone passionate about physiology. And then at that time, the Brazilian government, they had like a scholarship for students to live to do a PhD abroad, especially in fields that in Brazil they had like very few universities with PhD. And exercise science at the time, I think we had only two universities in the entire country with a PhD program, two or three, I think. And I applied to that program and I got selected, and it was a very, I would say, a very good offer. Like they paid the flights for me, for my wife. They gave me a stipend at the time, like that was 2004, was like $1,600 a month, and, was easy to live on that on, stipend. They pay the health insurance, they pay the tuition, and imagine that time, the decision that to leave like the dream job to go to another challenge. I talked to my wife. She also had like a very good job, like in a bank in Brazil, like in our city, and said, "Do you want to do the challenge?" She said, "Yes, let's do it." And then I came in 2004 for doing my PhD in the US. And then I spent from 2004 to 2008. And I came back to Brazil in 2008. And was a rough comeback because I did a lot of things in the US. Like I thought like getting a PhD, things would be easier for me in Brazil. And that's another thing, that things are never easy. And you have to fight for, you have to dedicate. I came back like I didn't have a job. And I had a degree from the United States, but the thing that they told me when I came to Brazil, you have to validate that we don't care if it's from, let's say, on from any country in the world, and even the United States is not valid. You have to validate your diploma, and basically it took like a year to get my degree validated, and then I had to start working like as a lecturer. I remember at the time when I came back, like I just had like an apartment that we bought before, and then that was like the greatest thing because like I had a place that I could live on, and then I start like with like teaching 6 or 8 hours a week as a lecturer in a small college. Like imagine like you come with a lot of information, like a lot of like things you want to do, like research wise, and and then things didn't stop there. And when I had like one of my professors, Dr. Roberts, he went to Australia, and when he came back, he said, Fabiano, on University of Sydney, they are hiring, and I think you are the perfect fit for the position. Why you don't apply? And it was not like a permanent position, it was a temporary position. And then I decided to apply. I got the job, but then that was the only thing that I think I didn't move forward with my career. Like on that, I'd say if things were very like in a sequence, this was the only path that I didn't take, that the challenge I didn't take it like the challenge, as I was afraid. My wife got pregnant at the time, and the family being like Australia is not the US, like it's 16 hours, 18 hours flight. And you understand, like it's much, I'd say it's much harder to get in Australia than get in the US, like in terms of number of flights, etc. And then the family was like, oh, you should consider. And then we decided not to go. Like I had everything signed, and I had to turn them down. And then I said the plan is stay in Brazil. Like I got scholarship from Brazil, I should give back to the country, and then that's what I did. Like in 2000, after my diploma was validated, and I applied for a job for a university. It was a brand new university. Uh, there was a college that the federal government was on expanding and becoming like a university, and they they hired me, and was the beginning that I had to put everything like the education in terms of like creating space, buying stuff, and in that time Brazil was doing pretty good like financially, and we built like a very nice lab with structure, like everything that I would say most of the labs here in the US they you have like we had there. And I worked there for 7 years, like very hard. Like we start like a program, like a PhD program in was not in exercise physiology, was like a basic physiology, like a physiology degree, because I had to get people from different fields to make like on a strong body of like teachers and researchers, and and then everything was fine. I was happy. Life was good. My son was growing up like in a health lifestyle, like with people surrounding friends. Like we had friends. We had like I would say we were happy. And the university was fine. Like I had some challenge, like on like in terms of being a young university, like things were not set it up, like but was fine. Like I had very good colleagues, like people that I could trust, like people we work hard to get things done. And but at that time, like 2015 or 16, Brazil had like a program to send students abroad Brazil, and I was the representative of my university. And I visited a couple of universities. I went to Australia to 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 create like partnerships, and then I was already 7 years. I was already tenured, and then was coming my time to do like my sabbatical. And I applied to the program for take my sabbatical abroad, because like in Brazil you keep your salary, and then they gave you like a support, like a for you for the expenses that you're going to have extra when you are doing your sabbatical abroad Brazil. And then they didn't give me, like they said that at the time Brazil economy was not going very good. Like we have like our president impeached, and then I could not move abroad. And then that's where I saw the opportunity to come to UNM. And I met like a friend of mine like a year ago. She told me about like a position. I didn't apply. And then the next year I met her again. She said, "Oh, we're gonna have like this position open." And I said, "I think I'm consider applying." And then that's where my history in the United States started, or started back again as a professor here at UNM. I'm going to stop here because it was a long conversation in terms of just to understand like my history. But I think it's interesting for students to see there is no like a very streamlined way to get where you want to go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think you knew this, but uh, I too wasn't a good student early in my academic career. So I had like a 1.6 GPA at a community college, and I was like one semester away of being dismissed. But decided to get my stuff together and finally transfer after 4 years at a community college, transferred to Fresno State. And, you know, similar to you, it was when I took the exercise physiology class is when, okay, I want to do this. Like I want to study this. I'm not quite sure in what way, in what particular career path, but it was that undergrad ex-phys class that really got me interested in the field. And then as I progressed, you know, master's and then PhD, which ultimately our paths crossed. I didn't know a lot of that stuff. So yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Uh, well, one thing that I just want to mention, like I tell my students, I hope no other professor you'll be like bad, like you'll be mad at me. But exercise physiology is the best class, like in the like if you are passionate about this field, I say like if you're passionate about exercise, if you're passionate about sport, and you want to invest in this field, like if you sit in exercise physiology, of course, it's going to depend on instructors, etc. But at least the content said, man, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I want to hear. Like, I don't want to stop. Like, that's what I tell my students. I say, guys, this is the best class you're going to have it. Not because of the instructor, but because of the content. And I hope you're going to enjoy as much as I enjoy to teach in this class, because this is the core for someone in our field. And then uh, that's my opinion. And then just in your story about my story, it means like this class has something for us that are passionate about this field.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I was going to say something. Oh yeah, I think your background is also somewhat similar to mine. I didn't work with athletes or sports teams, but for many years I worked in the field as a practitioner, right, of training and exercise and things like that, which I'm actually doing now. I work with older adults, but I think the practical experience really helps with teaching and explaining exercise physiology, because you've worked with individuals, with athletes. So it's more than just reading papers or reading out of a textbook, but like you have practical experience of putting those things into practice.
I completely agree, Kurt. Like, I think our field was built on people being from the sport and then taking the position like as a coach, as a trainer. And I value those people. Like, definitely, I think they have on. But what can we make better when we have these people? Give them knowledge, because like basically they are reproducing things or testing things that they don't have. I'd say the support, and sometimes like these people, they. I'm not saying that there are like some people that they are out there, they self teach themselves, like they teach themselves like reading papers, like doing a lot of this like without a degree, like, and I really acknowledge these people. But our field, as you said, that we are talking, we're dealing with people, we're dealing with something that is not a recipe. You understand? Like there's no recipe, there is a general recipe. Let's say like, what are the components that you're going to have for your recipe, but the amount of this that's going to give you like the little chains, like you can make like a cake, let's say, with like the same components, but the nice cake that you can make is going to depend like how you're going to treat with those components, like, or bread, like for example, like I love to make bread, and I'm making bread better as I get more used with like doing that stuff. And then I think our field is the same. Do you understand? Like, and if you are the best reader, like you have got like a lot of papers you have read, you have engaged like in your class, and you're finishing your degree, and then you're gonna step like, let's say, in the gym, and you auto declare or self declare as you the best there. Sorry, you're not. There are like several things you have to learn that people there are already there, or things that the environment is going to teach you, that's valuable. That's the thing about our field. Like you have to be on, I'd say, experimenting and be experimented on by the things that we do on, like in terms of training, coaching, etc. And we should give value like to the people that have experience. And of course, there is like people that have experience, usually they are bringing something that the people that they are more theoretical, they have the idea how to manipulate the variables, they understand the variables, but they are not good to understand when they manipulate something, what's going to happen. These people that are in the field, they know how this is going to happen, but they don't know well how to manipulate those variables very well. And then that's where I think when you get someone that has the practical experience with the knowledge, it doesn't need to be like just going to college, depending on the person. And I would say most of the time you're going to get from the college. That makes a great strength and conditioning, and even a great PT. Like we most of our students are thinking about this, and then the experience make like the best people in the field. Like, and you can see that the best people that we recognize the ones that have experience, and it's not for nothing. It's because there is something about the experience.
Right. Yeah. And I'm not too online and on social media and whatnot, and you're probably even less than I am, but that's one of the
I don't have
frustrating.
Instagram, just like I don't have Instagram.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
Neither do I.
my Facebook is basically nothing, and I have X or Twitter account that I don't post. Like uh, I try to, because like my job already engaged me so much, and if I would engage like, uh, and I'm not very good on that. That's basically what I want to say to you. Like, and I recognize like there are people that they want to sell it and they want to be exposed, and I recognize like that's good. We need people doing that. And but yeah, that's not my profile.
Right. And there are certainly really, really solid researchers that are active, right? So that's great, but also there's a lot of influencers, whatever that word even means. Podcast. What's that?
And in Brazil, they call coaches, like so
Yeah,
that like they influence other people, like coach, like
right. There's a lot of people that are on social media or on podcasts, and the thing that bothers me that doesn't sit well with me, and it speaks to what you were just saying, is they come out with do XYZ for this reason, for this outcome, right? If you want this to happen, do this specific protocol, this specific program, this specific diet, right? But like you just mentioned, and I don't think I've never heard it put this way, but it's a really good way to put it. But there ain't no recipe. there is no recipe, because every individual is going to respond differently to a given intervention. And, we may, from a theoretical or for a textbook or a class standpoint, it might be like, oh yeah, we acknowledge that. But until you're out in the field and you try to do some intervention and you see the individual responses, like you don't really appreciate that until you actually see it in practice. And so to come out and say, do XYZ for this specific result or this specific outcome, it sounds nice, but it really don't work like that in real life.
yeah. One of the things you can make association, like the thing about BMI and body composition. I'm going like completely different area, like, but just to understand like about the prescription. I think the general prescription for the general population, it's kind of we need something. We need some guidance. Like we need to say like you need to exercise 150 minutes per week. You need to have like certain intensity, so you understand some direction. And then that's kind of the BMI. Like you can know like if you are overweight or using the BMI. But on the other side, if you want to know like your body fat, you want to know like your muscle mass, you want to know your body density or your bone density, etc. There's like methods and things that you can do more. And then the same about the exercise. You understand? Like you can have like the best program having different variables. Like for example, I can give you like your ventilatory threshold. I can give you a lactate threshold to prescribe your running. I can give you like we can do like a biodex to monitor like your strength or your power. We can measure like your power. Do you understand? Like or you can do exercise with linear on velocity measurements or velocity based training. It means you're going to get much more like probably personalized work. And then like the BMI, as I said, like BMI and the body fat like comparison. And then I think that's where on I think our field is very good. And then as you said, like the individuality on if you have the response of the people like when they are exercising and then you can adjust, perfect. Because we know that we have people that they don't respond well to the surge intensity. You have to increase the intensity of the exercise to respond. It means it's a personalized thing.
Right. Yeah. But it's not, again, not a specific recipe. You can't make a cake off one recipe, right? Yeah. Okay. Um, so let's talk a little bit about what you're studying now, and this might relate to what you studied when you were at UNM as a doctoral student, because you were working with Carl, right?
Yeah, I work
Carl
on
Claudia.
let me tell a little bit like students is very interesting. I think for students very interesting to understand like what is a research line, what are the things that influence your life, like taking you like out of your research line and then on your passion. Like there are like several things that on happen. I have been in this field on, let's say, related to research. I would say probably 25 years I have been like engaged with research. And 25 years ago, when I told you like I was on in my undergrad and I had the exercise physiology, I got very interested and then I started joining the lab. And my first project, and the students you probably think this is fun. Like my first was to compare the rectal temperature during like exercise in a hot environment with the tympanic temperature. It was a very simple project. Like the professor at the time that was my mentor during my master's was not the same guy that on professor on my exercise physiology. And he had this question like he want to test like if the using like a tympanic thermometer would relate with, and that was the first project. And I love it. Like I started, I was engaged, and the university that I came from, they had an environmental chamber. They were already related to heat. Actually, it was cold. One of the professors from my university came to the US and with I'm not going to remember the name of his advisor was Emily. She was in University of Florida. I don't have her name. Probably it's going to come up during our conversation. And he got on a PhD studying cold, and then he came to Brazil, and then they put an environmental chamber to study cold in Brazil, but Brazil is hot, and then they start like this professor that the other professor that didn't come to the US that was my advisor, he started studying heat. And at that time, with this project, they were interested in hydration, and I got involved with this project. That was my first project, correlating tympanic temperature and rectal temperature at that time. I was like a undergrad, and I did the project. I presented. I got like on I would say experience presenting, coming to like local conference. That's what I tell my students. This is great, like to give you skills that is not like for the science, but it's skills for life. Understand, like debating with people, presenting something that has like an intro, a methods, a results, like you're thinking, do you understand? Like this is very important for any area that you go. Like it's going to give you skills that it's like life-based skills. And then this is where I became interested on in thermoregulation. Then the next project was something that I've been doing now, like very interesting. Like you asked me about this, and the sequence is coming to my mind. And on that same project, They were not doing anything with the urine, and then my advisor said, "Oh, let's analyze the urine using the USG, etc., to see if the protocols for hydration that they were using, they had like two environmental temperatures, like a temperate and a hot, and they were giving like what ASSM 1996, I think, was recommended that was replacing sweat rate. And then on that time, I remember I was very excited because I was measuring the USG, and it was very low when people were exercising during temperate environment, and people was like with urgency to go to the restroom when they were on the bike because the protocol was probably overhydrating them. Understand? And then that was the discussion that I came to the US, like I think it was 2000, and then that was a very big topic that people were discussing. Like I remember Edward Coyle on the other researcher, like Armstrong from University of Connecticut, and then the South Africa Noakes. They were like having debates about this, like about the protocol, like the hydration protocol. And then that was my initiation, like my beginning with this field. And then I started studying more thermoregulation, and I came to the question for my master's that I was very interested in sweat. I read uh, just like a paper, and then that brought me like some ideas about physical capacity, like people that had like a high VO2 max, why they sweat more than the regular people. And of course, we know that they produce more heat, but there is something, probably some adaptations that happen even when you equalize the heat production, that they produce more. And then at that time there was a study, I don't forget, like how think, like very interesting how things stick to your mind. Like there was a paper from Austrian from 1956 or 1965, like just changing the dates, that they did this kind of this analysis, but they didn't measure the way that I was planning to do during my master's. What they did like a percentage of VO2 max. Like people, let's say you're trained, you're going to exercise at 50%. If you are untrained, you're going to exercise also 60%, but your absolute work is going to be lower. And then the sweat rate for the individuals that, of course, like were exercising at 60%, but that were trained with a higher metabolic load, they were sweating more. And then what I got interested was to see if we can stimulate the sweat gland isolated using on a component called pilocarpine that makes the sweat glands to produce without the central component related. It's like it's a local. And then I got very interested on that, like and then that was my master's. I put people to do a VO2 max, measure their VO2 max, measure the sweat rate at the VO2 max, the end of that was one of my colleagues' research project. And then my project was a 2 hour exercise where I measure the sweat rate and then associated with the production of sweat induced by pilocarpine. And we use like electrophoresis, like a electrocurrent, to send the component like the pilocarpine to the skin, reach the sweat gland, and make the sweat gland to produce without like the central component. And then at that time we had people with very various VO2 max, and then I kind of make association based on people that had like a high sweat rate with high VO2 max, etc. And then that was my master's, and I had like a great mentor. And he was a physician, he was a cardiologist, and he was the guy that was in love, in passion about evolution. And when you think about sweat gland, you talk about evolution. You talk about like animals that evolved to lose like heat, and we are these individuals, like we are this species. And I got into this reading like books about evolution. Like there was a book that I read, I recommend. I don't know, I think I recommend you to read. I don't know if you read when you were doing the PhD with me, that's called The Hot Brain. And it's a wonderful book. Like I read and I loved like this author. And he, unfortunately, he had like a terminal disease and he was researching our field. And then he basically put like several of his thinking into the text based on his experience, but not based on only like, let's say, on published information, let's say. And the book was great. And then I got like very interested, and this motivate me to go to that's the reason, like coming back to what I when I said about the soccer. Like I had like the 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 job of my dream, but what was missing for me, because I was so engaged with this area, like studying evolution, like engaged and then thinking about research projects. I said, that's one of the things that I'm passionate about, and I want to develop more of that. And then I came to the US to work with a researcher, Dr. Susan Schneider, and she had like a large history like in NASA, studying thermoregulation as well, but studying like more astronauts, like in other perspectives as well. But she was mentored from someone from the John Hopkins that was a great mentor at that time, like one of the people that started the thermoregulation in the US. He was the second generation. She was the third generation. I came with the fourth generation. And also there is a mix. There was like I was interested in heat shock proteins as well, because these are evolutive, like in terms of evolution, this protein like it's in all species and is a protection not just for heat but for stress in general. And I was interested in one of the greatest researcher on this field was at UNM, that was Pope Mosley. um, and I came to UNM. Dr. Schneider was a wonderful mentor. Like I had a very great person, just not like the person that is like as you expect and give you advisement about, let's say, science, but also talking about life in general. Like she was very human. And I remember I came, like I didn't have like any furniture. Like she said, no, come to my house, I can provide you something. And very supportive, like not just on the academic side, but also the personal life. Like she invited me to do, because she knows the transition and from different countries to here. And then also we started like this collaboration at that time, like and basically there's no I would say our field in 2003 was very poor in terms of molecular knowledge. I would say started probably 8 years ago with some research. I would say not started, but the exercise science, I would say, being engaged with molecular research was not great at that time. Of course, we have John Holosi's doing like research on the 60s, on the 70s, but was not exercise science related to our field. Like we started probably like in the 80s, 90s, and then especially in the 2000s that we saw like a growing interest on our field in the molecular aspect. And Dr. Mosley, he was very interested in heat shock proteins and he was not very interested in exercise. He was very interested in heat stroke in general. He has like on animal models. And then I kind of convinced Dr. Schneider that we would have like a very interesting match if we bring our physiology experience with his molecular interest. And then I spent a summer in his lab learning some of the techniques. I didn't know how to pipette, just to have idea at the time. And Carl, he was not in the lab. We had like other people in the lab at the time. And Carl was starting to do some work with him, like in terms of the gut permeability, like not the gut permeability, but a model to create like a similar model of permeability with cells. And then I spent the summer there. I learned some, and I knew a little bit about the field about heat shock proteins, and something that with my readings, and then that's another thing that I recommend your students and our students reading. Reading is going to give you a lot of information. It's going to give you questions. It's going to give you knowledge about that area. And I remember passage. I don't remember the exactly where. I think I can tell like what was one of the chapters of the GSSI Institute. They published like 8 or 9 on kind of books, but with authors review. And I remember I read, we don't know what happened with HSP when people are heat acclimated. Why? Because on the model at that time was that if you heat stress cells or mice, but when they said heat stress was not physiological heat stress, you would heat stress the cell or the mice to a certain level that 10% is going to die. You create what we call thermotolerance. Like if you expose that animal to even a higher temperature, the animal survive. And then at the time, the explanation was related to heat shock proteins. But something that were more physiological, there was nothing. And we didn't know anything. And then I read that. And then that was something I said, I want to study that on my PhD. And then I convinced my advisor, she was into that definitely because it was something we used to do in the lab, like thermoregulation. And then I talked to Mosley, he was in, and he provided the facility for us to do the molecular part. And then we came with the physiology, and then that's where the bridge started on between what we call here at UNM, like the South and the North campus. Uh, at that time, my advisor, she got like a grant from DARPA, the defense agents from US. And then she allowed me to put the heat acclimation project inside of the project. And then I collect the data for my PhD on like PBMCs, as you know, on separating, culturing them, and then checking what happened with HSP, with heat acclimation. And at that time, the Army was doing also a project at the same time, interested on that. But we were first publishing, and we were the first to show that heat acclimation change heat shock protein. And I went further and I tested the cells, the PBMCs, heating up the cells to a thermal tolerance temperature and comparing what was happening with the heat acclimation. As expected, was not the same levels of HSP that we were building. For your students to know, or the audience, HSP, it's a heat shock protein. And basically, what is this protein? Because we have protein in our body, correct? Like, and it's an intracellular protein. And these proteins, they are called chaperones. Initially, when was discovered, and was by a mistake, someone left like some cells in the incubator in a higher temperature, and then they observed like at the DNA that something was increasing, and then at the time they said, "Oh, this is we're going to call these proteins as heat shock proteins," and then we found out that different stress like UV and other stress can also increase this protein inside the cell. But the good thing about, or the cool thing about these cells, that they are called like chaperones. Basically, what is a chaperone? And you guys probably have heard a chaperone, like you're going to visit someplace, you have a chaperone, someone that's going to walk you through and show like the places, etc. Inside of the cell, a chaperone basically check the proteins to see if the binding of the proteins that makes like the shape of the proteins is fine. Because if or are fine, because if you lose, like, let's say, a bond and then it lose the shape, that protein does not have any role and then has to be denatured or fixed, let's say. And then this is the protein that do that. And then also heat shock proteins helps to after like a session of stress to make these proteins come back as they were, and making the check. and that's the reason they are very important in stress in general. And at that time, like we published, like we were very happy, and then came I came to Brazil, and then that's I was saying, like, not everything in your life is going to be great all the time. I came to Brazil, I didn't have a structure. I was imagine like you come like with research questions that the literature is discussing, and then I came back to Brazil a year teaching like in a small college. And I said, like, I'm underutilized here on, and that's the frustration when the frustration came. And then us Kurtz know, like, we need to have some structure to conduct research. When I got hired by the university, we didn't have like a structure set in place. Like they were building or building like the exercise science building, purchasing equipment, the chamber, and then took like 3 or 4 years. And then I had to basically do research, correct? Like I was trained for that. And then reading again, there was a paper that came 2008, like a very nice paper. You probably have heard me to talk about this, like was conducted in Australia by Mark Febbraio. Uh, you guys can see his work. He's like one of the leader. He's not like more in exercise science anymore, but especially in the early days, he did like a lot of work in our field. And Mark, he had a model that he overexpress. What is overexpress? Basically, the gene on the cell, like you make the cell to produce more of that protein. Like you can change the DNA of a mice or a cell, and then you can make the that mice or cell to produce more of that protein. And that time, like in 2008, he basically generate a model, animal that was overexpressing on HSPs in the muscle, okay? Specifically in the muscle. And basically, he gave to these animals like a very high fat diet. Like they could eat on basically, you get like condensed milk and like fat stuff like for the mice, and they eat and they get very obese. And then you see the consequence of that obesity, like in terms of the insulin resistance. You see like diabetes in the mice model, etc. And then he observed that the animals that had this overexpression of HSP, they didn't gain much weight, and then they did not develop like the insulin resistance. And then as an exercise physiologist, the time that he didn't have like a exercise model for the mice, I said, man, if HSP is like a way to control insulin resistance in the muscle, we have to find ways to develop like or to induce HSP. And then I had ideas to heat up people, but I was interested about the exercise. Is some of the effects of exercise related to HSP that we see the benefits of insulin resistance? And then that's where I got into the obesity and insulin resistance at the time. I create like a model, like I said, I need to study something that's relevant to the Brazilian population or the population in general, and then bring my expertise in terms of HSP and exercise. And then I conduct like a series of studies where we start like doing muscle biopsies in Brazil. And we were I would say we were the second university in Brazil, like in exercise science, to do muscle biopsies. And then we exercise people with obesity and insulin resistance or obesity, and then understand what happened in the signaling of the muscle. And then of course, always measuring HSP, understanding the role of HSP. I did some of that research for a certain period of time, up to the time that I came back to the US. And then when I was in Brazil, you asked me about like my research line, especially what I've been doing now. Remember, I was
Bob,
trying to do.
can I ask you what the results were with insulin resistance and exercise and HSP expression? Because
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know if you've seen this a lot, but social media podcasts, like a lot of people are into activating heat shock proteins for longevity benefits or health benefits, and a lot of times that's spoken about with sauna and heat exposure and things like that, because there is an association, right? Now, I think they indulge a little bit and overextend the data, but there is a relationship between HSP and, let's say, health and metabolic health. So, from your research on that, what is your consensus or thinking in terms of how HSPs, especially related to exercise, plays a role in insulin resistance and or preventing insulin resistance with obesity?
Okay. Yeah. There was a study on humans at the time, on like very close when we start. Like I think they came. What was actually Febrile that did. They observed that individuals with diabetes, they had less HSP in their muscle. And then when we test that, basically we saw healthy individuals, they had like baseline more HSP in the muscle, the obese individuals less, and the insulin resistance with obesity even less. And we observed that the people with obesity, when they exercise, the levels of HSP increase was not statistically different from the people that was healthy. And then, but the obese insulin resistant individuals, they did not increase as much. It means there is probably
Can I ask,
something with the mechanism. Go ahead.
when you say increase, are you speaking acutely from a single
Acutely.
exercise session or after a period of training?
Sorry, acutely. We just tested acutely. And for this first study, the next one was on training. And then related HSP to the health components. Although HSP is a chaperone, HSP is a protein that, I'd say, do this surveillance. It also affects the signaling, like the inflammatory signaling of the tissue. And some of the signals that we see, like, for example, that when you are more inflamed, and then we know that the inflammation has a role. Like when I say inflamed, let's say someone that has obesity, there is like this theory that obesity is not all people, like not all the obese people, they have inflammation like at a certain level that's detectable. But when we can detect that level of inflammation, especially because like the adipose tissue, they increase in size, and then that decrease like the vascularization, the passage of the blood and the oxygen with the increase of the adipocyte, and then we call the crown on adipose tissue, like the one that's in the center does not get the oxygen because the ones that are surrounding, and then it's a kind of squeezing the blood vessels, and then you start like producing this anti-inflammatory, the pro-inflammatory signals, and then influence the muscle as well. And the HSP has the ability to kind of correct that inflammatory pathway, and as an anti-inflammatory protein. And then at the time, we were interested to see acutely and also chronically if an exercise program could change that. And then we did that with moderate intensity exercise, and then we did also with high intensity interval training. And then that's where I got into the high intensity interval training into my research, because like at that time, like people were showing that this type of training that was initially limited only for athletes could be beneficial for that population. And then the metabolic stress of that type of training would basically be more beneficial for individuals with this condition. And then that's where the HSP connects with the health. In terms of, I don't know if you wanted me to speak about that part about like doing sauna or etc. for the health. On
Yeah, please do.
HSP, on basically when you are exposed to a stress, your body creates let's say a mechanism for that to deal with that stress again. Of course, if the stress is too much and then you kill the cell, it's done. But if you give the cell the opportunity feel that stress, and then that stress create a mechanism to deal with that stress, and that stress will be lower when you're exposed to that stress again. HSP is part of that. And people that they have this mechanism, especially with heat acclimation, like continuous heat exposure, they probably deal better with those stress and other stress because the cells can already prepare. We don't have like long-term studies to show like with 5, 10 years on what is the benefit, the health benefit of this chronic exposure. But there are like studies showing that there are benefits like the Finland sauna, etc. Although they're like uh, when we start talking about like chronic and prolonged, the research quality drops a little bit because then you have to go to records. And then when you go to records, they're like something that people are not well matched. And then we lose some of, I would say, like the understanding. But as a personal opinion, I would say it can help. So I think as the exercise, I used to say that a lot. Exercise is stress. That's the reason we are exposed to exercise, and then our body adapts to that stress. And then when you're exposed to that stress again, the stress is lower. The same happen with all the systems. Like you're exposed to stress. If that stress give you the opportunity to adapt to that stress is going to be lower, and so on. Understand? Of course, this is not a continuous, like it's going to kill depending the stress, like the level of stress, or if you don't let the system to recover, and to adapt. But I think that's the general idea that I think about, like the components of health when we think about like sauna and others. Understand, like you're just giving a certain stress to the body that the body is adapting, and then this could be beneficial in the future for future stress.
Right, right. It's it's interesting because when I first started getting into XPhys and actually getting into thinking of it from like a more scientific standpoint, my master's advisor like brought that point up. He said he was from Puerto Rico. He was a weightlifter, and he was one lift away from qualifying for the '84 Olympics. And he went to go pull Mickey Mouse weight. It was a light weight for him, but he just pulled it a little bit different and tore his bicep tendon, and so he got stuck mentoring me. But but what he did say one day was he liked studying exercise because it is the body's response to stress, of when the body is stressed. And up until that point, I had never thought of it that way. Now, once you say it, it's like, oh, of course, right? And you saying this here now, and then you expressing it in that way to me, in addition to that Lieberman paper that talked about exercise as medicine from an evolutionary standpoint, like that was the most influential paper that I've ever read, right? And everything that I teach and discuss and even like research is from that evolutionary perspective, because it ultimately explains everything, right? And so when you say exercise is a stress, then also bringing in the evolutionary aspect, like, man, my students hear that all semester long. If they remember one thing is actually two things. One, exercise is medicine because of evolution, and then two, exercise is a stress.
Yep.
But going back to the point of heat shock proteins and health and the research and let's say sauna and heat exposure, the point that you mentioned in terms of when you start looking at long-term outcomes and you're looking at records and the quality of data sort of drops off. One of the things that I'll mention this to you, and you can speak on it or let me know what you think about it. But I'm not an expert in that area, right? I know a bit of it. I do know that, like I mentioned, largely because of you, HSPs are involved with the positive adaptive responses to exercise and certain other, exposures like, heat stress. That is a stress, so the body is going to adapt in a positive way to that. And it's related to health. But looking at more of the long term, say, mortality data or long term health data, you are looking at studies and research that are not interventions, right? You're not having people come in and one group does sauna and then another group doesn't do sauna, and then you see, okay, what are the health outcomes from that, right? A lot of the long-term data come from records or surveys and people reporting, I've done sauna 3 days a week for 15 years, or I haven't done sauna at all for 15 years. And then you look at health outcomes and mortality rates and things like that. And one of the biggest things that I think doesn't go appreciated is with those sorts of things, especially in the US and I'd say Western countries in general, and it could be globally, I just wouldn't be too familiar with, is the individuals that are going to be participating in things like sauna or some sort of heat exposure or do like cold plunges, you can talk about cold stuff too. They may be individuals that are higher on the socioeconomic status spectrum, right? Because they have the discretionary income or they have the discretionary time and the ability to concern themselves with those sorts of things like existential crisis of mortality and stuff like that. Whereas others that, aren't engaging in those things, they may be lower on the socioeconomic status spectrum. And so if you look at two groups of people, a group that does sauna for 10, 15 years or whatever the case is, and people that don't, and you don't account for something like that, which a lot of the data that I've seen really doesn't.
Sometimes they account. Sometimes they account for that. But sometimes they don't account for the end. Like do you understand? Like, because 15 years in your life. Like you have people that, as you're saying, like we can account for socioeconomic status, like, but then things happen in your life. Understand? Like people say, "Oh, I didn't do it for a certain period of time, etc." And then that's probably our stressful things like that happen in your life. And then if you use like mortality data point, something that you don't have like the end point, that's going to make difference analyzing that data. And I think that's where the data becomes like more obscure when we see this. But thinking about sauna and then bringing about the context of exercise as stress, I think the message that we can give to people is that exercise, you can, let's say, get all the, you can separate all the stressors, let's say, and for example, the metabolic stressor, like what exercise does. Basically, you have a tissue that start contracting and say, hey, I need energy. This energy has to come from somewhere, like in tissue, from like adipose tissue, the skeletal muscle, the liver. And that stress that you create there, do you have the apparatus set for the stress that you are exercising? If you don't have, your body's going to build up on that, correct? It's going to make more efficient. And then that's what the word that people loves about exercise, make your body more efficient, correct? The other component, heat, is another component because you break this like bonds, etc. You generate heat. And then heat is another component. You can get like several components like of the exercise, and that's what makes exercise unique. And then when you go to do sauna, that's great. You're creating one of the stresses or the stressors. That's the exercise component that's heating up your body. Cool, you're going to get the benefits. Are you going to get the full benefits that something can give you, like the exercise can give you? Nope, it's not going to give you. Like you don't have the metabolic stress. You're going to increase your metabolism, but it's like not big. Like you're going to have your heart beating more. You're going to have like vasodilation. That does increase like much your energy cost. Your muscles not going to do much. And then there's another component of the exercise that you're not stressing. And then when people think about sauna, I think it's better than anything like if you're not doing exercise. But the exercise is the major component that's going to give you the full benefit. Of course, uh, some of the adaptations that sauna can give it to you is I don't think exercise cannot do it. Of course, depending where you're doing the exercise. If you compare probably the exercise being done in a hot environment, the exercise has more benefits in the long term because you have the other components that are being activated, your brain being activated, the blood flow to your brain, and we can list like all 2,000 things that exercise does. But and then in the long term, for someone that, let's say, they don't have the desire, they don't have access, and they don't want to do it, or they cannot do it, because there are people that cannot do exercise, sauna could be a perfect option. I understand, but I don't like to people just to think that that's better, or I'm having like benefits similar, because it's not similar, because exercise is much, it's a multi-component on stressor, and sauna is probably has multi-component, but it's very much more limited than the exercise.
Right, right. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're working on now?
Okay, yeah, and I still have like other research areas that I like, as I mentioned to you, the obesity. Like we have, I have a research in body weight exercise, functional exercise. Like I had like two great students that did their PhD. I still love like working with, I'd say, different types of training. And I keep like doing this stuff, but I have been focusing more like back, as I told you, to my roots. On I have been doing more work with heat, and something that I didn't tell you when I was talking about the end of the obesity and insulin resistance, like when I finished like the when I'm moving out of Brazil, I was contacted by the Brazilian like work minister, and then to do some work with sugarcane workers, because like these are probably the workers in Brazil that uh, they are very hot, like they're exposed to the sun. They do a job that's very high in high metabolic on rate, and usually they are not like have access to water and food, etc., like adequate. And then I did like a field study in Brazil. I love it. Like I went to like this farm, like it was a sugarcane farm, in certain area in Brazil. I spent like 10 days on living with these people, like on eating what they were eating, on dressing what they were dressed, and then was amazing. Like I got their trust. Like I explained what I was doing. I said like I want to just know, like learn more about like your job, and then probably base it on this, your job more safe. And then at that time, like in this time, like they were identifying that especially sugarcane workers in Central America, they were dying like at the age of 40, 50 years old. Like these individuals, they didn't have any underlying disease, like no disease at all. And then they start like develop like chronic kidney disease, and then they die like with a couple of years after they discovered that. And then I kind of, the time I didn't have much of on, because I was in the transition. That's where we met. I didn't continue this research up to the point that I was more settled at UNM, and then I started working with the components that probably affect our kidney, and when you are working in hot environment or hot environments. And I started like investigating the effect of, let's say, these people, they do like very hard work. They carry like a lot, like these people are carrying, they're cutting 14 tons of sugar. That's kilograms of like 14,000 kilograms of sugar cane in a day. And they have to pile this sugar cane like after they cut, and then working like 7, 8 hours a day in a very hot environment. And then I started like doing lab work to try to understand the components that probably are affecting the kidney of these individuals that were dying from chronic kidney disease. And one of the first studies we did, you remember Zidong, and we basically create a model that you do some eccentric contractions, like you run like downhill, and then you do induce like muscle damage, and then that creates like an environment, like we compare like the temperate, or actually was a hot environment with or without on muscle damage. And then we observe that there is an increase in the components like related to the stress to the kidney. We measure like this molecular biomarkers that when the kidney is stressed, it releases these stressors. And then we kind of observe that. And then we observe like the intensity, like Jonathan Houck, he came, and then we did like evaluate the effect of continuous and intermittent work with more high intensity work. Also, and then we did some work with ibuprofen, because these people they use because of the work, like they get like fatigued, everything. Like there is like a an NSAIDs, not just ibuprofen, but some types of NSAIDs in these countries, like you can buy over the counter. And then there is this theory that these people are probably developed because of this, and then we want to test that. And then we recently we're actually testing now caffeine in the kidneys, although we think that's going to be in the opposite direction. Caffeine is going to create more vasodilation at the efferent artery, and then probably not stressing much the kidney. We have a study that we're going to do on soon with alcohol, to see like overnight drinking, how affect you work in the heat. And also something that I have been doing more, and it's been amazing, is doing work with construction workers. I got a grant 2 years ago to investigate on how hot these people they get when they are working like in the sun, like in the summertime. I went last year to Kansas, like a construction site that was very large, and then we got the first piece of data with core temperature in construction workers in the U.S. And I'm coming in the next 2 weeks, actually next week, not like a week from now, again with a even larger site to investigate. That time we did like in 30 workers. Now we're going to do like over 200 workers to see how hot they get. Also, I did some work in New Mexico with construction workers, like road workers. And I'm very interested to understand more on about the occupational like aspect, especially with climate change. These people, they are like exposed to this hot environment. Like today here in Albuquerque, we have like 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Like I imagine California is not different. But imagine like in Florida now, imagine like in the Midwest or the or even like DC or like New England region, the Northeast, like it's humid and hot. And these people are working outside. It's amazing. Like we have to recognize these people. They do like great work for the country, and because like this is a big industry we have, and we have to try to protect these individuals, because we uh, people are dying, understand, like of heat stress, heat stroke, not just workers but the general population as well, especially elderly individuals. And that's something caught me, and I have been investigating this population, like the occupational.
Right. Yeah. Uh, that's something that I'm familiar with. In California, right now, I'm in Long Beach. It's like when it gets like 80, people are complaining that it's hot. That's not hot, right? I'm from Fresno area, Central Valley, California, where it's, during the summertime it's 110, 115. And I'm Mexican, and there's a lot of farm workers, right? So like my grandparents, that's what they did for work. They worked in the fields like throughout all year round, even during the summer. My mom, they were poor. My mom, along with her, other seven siblings, they worked in the fields too as children to try to help support families, including in the middle of the summer. And there's when I go back home, there's a big population of farm workers that, like you say, are like the hardest working people that I've ever seen, and they don't
Mhm.
get paid that much, and they have rough lives, but they do it because they have to. And studying those types of populations and those types of environmental stressors is, yeah, it's definitely important.
Just to put it into more context, we're coming from last week, the 2 or 3 consecutive hottest day on Earth recorded. It means the things are there. Like these people are suffering.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, luckily I didn't have to work in the fields growing up, but we lived in the country, and so I'd be working outside with my dad, digging holes or pouring concrete or retaining walls or whatever. It's 112 degrees, and if when I wouldn't want to be out there, my dad would just say, think of what your mom went through. Think of the work that your mom did, right? And at that point, like, man, I can't say nothing. So I definitely can appreciate that area of work. And it's not something that is maybe people in our field in general might think of as a potential line of research or a particular area of interest, but it is an important one. And I think it speaks to how sort of broad our field is of exercise physiology, and it does relate to a lot of different fields that may be on the periphery or some sort of like unique intersection. But this is definitely one of those areas. So I think that's super cool.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then uh, we don't know the future, and we have to be prepared. Like we have to be these people. We have to find ways to create like resilience, and then give conditions like if it's rest, if it's water, if it's shade, if it's like I've been testing, we just tested like sodium bicarbonate. Also, that's another one like to help the kidney. And we got some interesting. We have a collaboration with Arizona State University that they did a kind of simulate field study recently this summer, and we are trying to help these individuals. And as you said, on especially the immigrants, we don't know much about it because like they're not counted into the system sometimes. And but we know that these people are doing the work, and it's hard to get them like into the research that we want because of the things that we as we know. But yeah, like the federal government is putting like a rule because there is no rule like the states and the counties they can have like their own rule, and then the federal government is trying to put a standard, and we are kind of in the process. They put a proposal out there, and then we read there are like areas that we need to discuss, and we are trying to understand more. But yeah, we need definitely this is something is important for our society to understand. Even the general population, like imagine Phoenix, 116 degrees, 118 degrees Fahrenheit, like in the middle of the summer. I didn't check today, but I bet to you that Phoenix is 110 today easily. And imagine that you have a power outrage. They did like a study. They would need 800,000 people would need to go to seek for assistance, depending how long the power outrage can last. Because these people they have like underlying conditions, like they're going to be looking for on medical assistance, and we cannot provide that. It means like we are living in a moment that we have to consider heat as something that we have to do something. Understand? Like as a society, we have to create ways to protect the most vulnerable, and then that's what my research is going. I'm trying to get ways that we can protect the vulnerable workers, like the ones that are exposed to the sun, doing hard work. How can we help? And then of course protecting the industry, because like you're not going to work in the sun, but there's no jobs, and these people they need to survive. They need to live their lives.
Right. My grandpa marched with Cesar Chavez to on that point of workers and all of that. But yeah. All right. Well, hey Fab, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you agreeing to talk. Like you said, it's been a while, so it's nice to catch up, and it's always great to talk to you. Kind of like I mentioned at the beginning, you were and continue to be like a really, really impactful person for me personally, but also academically, scientifically, professionally. That pretty much as I get older and mature into academia and as a professor, and even just as just growing a little bit older, I appreciate your mentorship more and more. And yeah, there were some times there were some challenging times, and I take responsibility for that. But especially with that, I really appreciate your mentorship, your patience, and your ongoing support. It really has done a lot, and I find myself thinking and realizing, appreciating your mentorship and your guidance more and more as I get older, and now I'm a mentor. So yeah, just want to share that and appreciate that very, very much.
Yeah, for since you're a mentor now, and for us, it's great to see our students where they are, the impact that they are having. I think the research is very important, but we work with people, and it's always like good to know and hear like what our students are doing. And you were one of the students that sometimes give me some challenge. Sometimes like it's normal. Like we had our ways to try to figure out things, and I'm very grateful that I had you, and it was a great time. Like you helped me a lot with my transition, and I'm very glad that I made some impact. And as I said, like that's the most important thing that we do with science, like not just like publishing papers, doing the research, but creating the next generation as you're doing. Like as Dr. Schneider was my advisor, I told you like the third generation of some like the people that start like this field in the US, and I'm the fourth, and people are be the fifth, and I feel grateful. It's a great area. And if you want to live a life that you're going to be surrounded people that most of the time happy, like they want to do something, you're doing something that if you find this a great thing that you feel passionate about it, you're not going to get like much money, but I can guarantee that you're going to get on a decent life. This is the way to go. Like I feel fortunate to be in this area, meet people like you and other students, and then see how things are moving. I agree. I great appreciate for the invitation. I hope if with this podcast we can impact maybe like 2, 3, 4 people. That's great. We did our job. Understand, like people that are going to science, they're going to maybe to try to bring more knowledge. They're going to be like more careful, like and with the information they are bringing to people. I think we did our job, and I appreciate it. And I hope to see you soon in Albuquerque.
Yeah, looks that way. So, yep. All right. Again, Fabiano, appreciate it. Thank you for the time, and yeah, look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Thank you, Kurt.
All right. Okay, Fab.